This conference will now be recorded.
So everybody knows. So thank you for those joining us today for this press briefing. I'm Knut Rostad of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard. And today with me is Jeff Lang from Stark & Stark Attorneys at Law. Today, both Jeff and I will make brief opening comments about the March 30th SEC FAQ on Form CRS. On that piece of that, FAQ that relates to fiduciary and fiduciary duty status and CRS. So in my opening comments, I want to make just 3 quick points. First, to recall that our prior research from last fall on the CRS forms that we surveyed showed that the vast majority of registered investment advisors did not cite and did not describe their fiduciary status on their Form CRS. Our follow-up on that point suggests that the reason they did not was either because they thought they could not, or they thought they were discouraged from doing so, and that, in fact, a number of securities attorneys and compliance consultants were also expressed being leery of, in fact, citing fiduciary status on the CRS form. So that was last fall. That's my point one. The second point is that at this point, it was clear, notwithstanding how many RIAs did not cite fiduciary, it was clear from the guidance up until March 30th that there was a way to do so that would meet the requirements, the criteria of the SEC staff. And the central largest criteria, frankly, was simply not to omit and not to change any of the prescribed language that was made clear in the instructions. So it's important to remember that at that time, the SEC offered a pathway forward and an open door. Advisors could cite and describe this established fact of law. That was then. My third point is that I think the 765 word staff opinion changes everything regarding this in terms of it has essentially slammed the door shut. Its language is clear. We believe that it leaves no plausible and meaningful way for an investment advisor to tell investors the truth about their fiduciary status. And we say this notwithstanding the very first sentence in this section is that, yes, it's possible to do if you follow our instructions. And I maintain that after that first sentence, it sets out in the text and in the footnotes a barrier that makes it basically implausible and not meaningful to do so. And what stands out from our view? One, the staff opinion cites fiduciary in association with a number of words in this brief section. Words like extraneous, words like unresponsive, unsubstantiated, inaccurate, misleading, or embellishing. The staff opinion then worries words such as, quote, an investment advisor who is held to the fiduciary standard, unquote, or a higher standard, quote unquote, are likely to be deemed inappropriate. I mean, I think that we just need to digest that last part there. The wording, the language of simply saying investment advisor who's held to the fiduciary standard, quote unquote, is going to be deemed likely to be inappropriate. These are strong messages. These messages are not going to be lost on either securities consultants or compliance consultants. So, so the bottom line from our perspective is the staff opinion derives a centuries-old legal principle infused in the Investment Advisors Act of 1940 and affirmed by the Supreme Court. And that's why we conclude it seems to seek to eliminate the word fiduciary in this SEC disclosure, and instead rely on an undefined term that it brandishes everywhere, and that of course is best interest. So commissioners who understand the havoc that implementing this guidance can have, we believe must override this staff opinion. Thank you. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Knut. Appreciate that. Yeah, and I just would like to add on to what was just said. I echo those sentiments, and sort of coming at this from the angle of somebody who works in the compliance and consulting and investment management and regulatory field, who is charged with the duty of drafting and or amending Form CRSs. I echo these concerns. The new FAQ, as was suggested, that starts out by saying that the term fiduciary or fiduciary duty may be used. However, it does then sort of close the door after that. And what to the extent that this might be permitted, I think the FAQ doesn't go far enough in guiding us as to what is appropriate use of the terminology. How does it fit? How can we use it when we are assisting our clients or perhaps folks who are doing the CRS on their own when they're drafting? How can we use it? We understand different variations where we can't, but where will it fit? And so while we've got several suggestions noted in the FAQ of things that would be inappropriate, can there be some suggestions relative to where it might fit, which section of the CRS, and how the term might be appropriate in the eyes of the regulators? I also echo the concern that there is a suggestion that the term where an advisor is held to a fiduciary standard is noted as inappropriate, when this in fact may be factually correct. And the general standard we apply here is don't put in things that are misleading or factually incorrect. And for folks who are in the investment advisory area, who are investment advisors, registered investment advisors, this fiduciary terminology is going to be accurate and correct. So I don't think it would be considered necessarily extraneous or inappropriate. Much of the CRS language and format, as is suggested in the FAQ, is prescribed in terms of language, what can be said, the wording that should be used, the questions, etc., what you should ask your advisor. So one of the things we'd like to put out there is, would the staff consider clarifying how the fiduciary term can be included, perhaps in the context of the prescribed language? Is there a way to, include something in the format, since much of the CRS is in the formatted, pre-formatted, it is prescribed language? Is there a way to suggest within that language a use of the fiduciary duty or the fiduciary term, so that it is pre-established and will be something that is acceptable to the staff, to the extent that it is an accurate statement made by the drafter of the CRS, so as to avoid not being considered extraneous material, so we don't run into that speed bump. And then from a compliance consulting perspective, just to sort of put the bow on this, we're simply trying to operate within the parameters set forth by regulators, and we're trying to operate in that context. So giving us clearer guidance that we can then include in Form CRS is going to help everybody, to the extent that we're all trying to do the right thing, to the extent that we're trying to create compliant material that will not come back to present problems later on. I think it's going to be helpful for everybody if more guidance can be given relative to how the terminology can be used. Because there are folks that are going to end up using the terminology, and we may as well create a roadmap for them to do that in a manner that works for regulators and works for the advisor community. That's my spiel.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
Appreciate your remarks. Okay, let's open up the floor to the journalists we have on the line, and ask us any follow-up questions. Art.
Knut, thanks for putting together this event and taking our questions. You're arguing that RIAs should have a freer hand in putting the term fiduciary and fiduciary duty in the Form CRS. At the same time, though, Form CRS has been criticized for being too dense. I mean, your group has criticized it for being too dense and not helpful to an investor. So even if it was clear that you could use fiduciary duty wherever you want in Form CRS, how big a difference would it make given the way the document is currently structured is my first question. And secondly, even if the SEC admonishes RIAs not to use fiduciary and fiduciary duty too much in the Form CRS, they can still use it in television ads, which many firms do. So does it really matter that it's not in Form CRS?
Good questions. Let me start with the second one, and then see if Jeff wants to add anything. What CRS is intended to be is a two-page document that gets to the gist of what it is that a broker-dealer or an investment advisor do. And it's supposed to do that without becoming a marketing piece, as you know, and as the SEC has said repeatedly. If the SEC actually was serious about enforcing that sentiment, I would guess that you could go and look at 40% of the text in the CRSs that we've looked at, both on the RIA and the BD side. This is not a BD thing only, could be removed because they are focused on and think of it as a marketing document as opposed to an informational document. So part of the answer to the question is, if this was actually enforced as it was intended, it could be an extremely useful document, in large part because it's only 2 pages, and because it's only 2 pages and if it was clearly written, it would actually be read. So that's one thing. To your other, well, to your other question, or maybe that answers both your questions in one, perhaps, that in the context of making it an informational piece as opposed to a marketing piece, and being able to use the word fiduciary appropriately, as opposed to exaggerating it, that is only going to be beneficial. The problem is that, and again, it's only 765 words. This segment, including the footnotes, so you pointed out the text itself is even less. But the number of times that the SEC staff say things that just make the eyes roll is pretty significant. And one of those things, one of those points they make is that technical or legal terms should not be used because they're not understood. Where actually it's the opposite. And the opposite is that because of the notoriety over the last 5 to 6 years given fiduciary, the evidence out there, the research out there suggests that in fact investors associate fiduciary with a positive attribute they should be looking for. Now, they're not going to be able to tell you like a first-year law class exactly what it means, but they know it's something they should look for. So that is just as a starting point, one reason to let RIAs tell investors the truth. Now, if the SEC is really committed to abolishing the fiduciary standard, then they should say so outright and say that this is what we're going to do, or they should go to Congress and say we think the Investment Advisors Act of 1940 needs to be redone. But short of doing that, simply stating your fiduciary status is telling investors the truth. And I think the SEC in some fashion should explain why is it that they appear to seek to eliminate the word fiduciary in this context of a legal disclosure that they say they hope everybody will read. Okay, I'm sorry, I probably went too far. Jeff, you want to add anything to that? And then
Yeah,
Tracy?
certainly. Mark, thanks for the question. I just add a couple of comments. One is I think your initial question was, what is, does it really need to be here in the Form CRS when, yes, it can be, we see it in various commercials, television, marketing, whatever. And I think, it's a very good point. And I think one of the responses I would have to it is, when you have a context like, marketing on television or in media, whatnot, you don't necessarily know that your client or your prospect is picking up on that. You don't know that information is reaching them in that context. Whereas if something is in the Form CRS, that necessarily is being presented to your existing clients as well as any prospects. So it's a direct communication to those folks who it's going to be relevant for. The other thing I think you asked was, where might it go in the CRS? And as folks on the line probably know as well as I do, we'd probably, put it under that legal obligations section. When I'm acting as your investment advisor, what are my legal obligations? Well, in this context, it's going to be, we're acting as a fiduciary. So we would find it, find a way to weave the language into that area. And one of the comments I was speaking with Knut offline is saying, the SEC has a lot of prescribed language, and we include that in all our Form CRSs, and it certainly helps us in the drafting process. One of the suggestions I was mentioning earlier was, what if they could, to the extent that they have an acceptance of the use of the term fiduciary, would it be possible to maybe come up with some prescribed language that could be put in for those for whom the term is accurate? So everything should be, fair and proper. But could we develop could they develop some language that they would consider acceptable when they see it in CRS?
Thank you.
Tracy, did you have a? We can't hear you. Are you on?
It says she's muted, but
Okay.
maybe there's an issue with her microphone. We can't hear you, Tracy. Do you think you could type it out?
Or phone in? Is it, or would the phone make a difference? Do we know?
It would probably work as well. We cannot hear you.
Has she typed anything in? There we are.
No.
No. Okay. Oh dear.
There you go.
Okay. She's doing that. Have you seen firms concerned about this in their Form CRS? Jeff, do you want to start with that?
Sure. We have, we have had firms, we work, of course, we just completed the annual amendment season, and we work with firms not only to update their Form ADV, but of course to update their Form CRS as part of the full annual amendment process. I have certainly had firms who raise this point, in addition to firms just raising general issues with Form CRS. Why do I have to say this way? I have probably as many comments relative to the prescribed language and what can't be changed, as well as bringing up this issue. But there are definitely firms that speak to, hey, why can't I say this? And we have to speak to them and say, well, there's not clarity right now on the use of this terminology. So right now, really, unfortunately, the best interest language is where we need to be.
I guess the only thing that I would add, and when we first came out with our research last October, November, we found many firms were frankly surprised that they were allowed to put their fiduciary status on here, and they didn't like being identified as a firm that did not put their fiduciary status on their CRS. So that emphasized to me the effect that the language, the first set of language that came out at the origin of CRS, frankly, had the effect of either frankly not being clear enough so that firms knew they could put it there, or discouraging them from putting it on there. So right. Anyway, that was the response that we got. Does Tracy have a follow-up there on the questions?
Yeah, she had said, are firms concerned that they are hampered? Do you guys respond to that?
I think in my mind, firms are more concerned about not wanting to be, part of any sweep, where if somebody decides, from a regulatory standpoint, somebody decides to zero in on this issue, and it turns out that, they've stated something or set forth information, fiduciary or what have you, which information is not considered acceptable in the way that it's presented on Form CRS. Nobody wants to be that test case. Nobody wants to be part of a sweep. So it's more of a, hey, we don't want the trouble that might come along with, doing something that's in a gray area.
And yes, and I think that the other part of it is, yes, they don't want to be swept in like that, and so that I think this is the soft effect of just the mere language that the SEC can use to suggest one thing, while explicitly the SEC says that that's not the case. Now, i.e., I think the language suggested to many RIA firms they should not put their fiduciary status, while a technical reading, and Jeff and I have discussed this at length, at least prior to March 30th, was that the SEC was not saying that. The SEC was not saying they could not use this language. What the SEC was saying is that if you do so, you have to follow these steps. You can't mess with the prescribed language, and so that's how I think the communication was received by many RIAs. Any other questions from Tracy?
Yes, Tracy. She also said, are there satisfactory workarounds in terms of advisors being able to point out to clients and prospects elsewhere that they are fiduciaries, and what that means in terms of a differentiator?
Well, I guess as Mark observed at the beginning, that this issue regarding SEC disclosure doesn't per se directly affect what advisors can put on their website, what they can put on their marketing materials, as long as someone like Jeff takes a look at it to make sure that they are not misleading, that they're being accurate, and the other things that he looks for. But still, and I don't know, I've never seen any research on this, Jeff. The impact of the soft effect of, and you alluded to it, and I've alluded to it, but the impact of the soft effect of the regulatory message, I think, is something that is clearly at play here, and although it's hard, if not impossible, to quantify. So I guess that's how I would think about it.
Yeah.
Patrick, are you there? Do you have any questions for either Jeff or myself?
Hi, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, great. Thanks for having us here today. A little bit connected to some questions we've had already, but you know, we were talking a little bit about one of the things you'd hope to see out of this is that that maybe the SEC could be a little bit more proactive in providing some type of language or something additional. You know, that they're in this FAQ, they're telling a little bit about what you can't do, but you'd like to see a little bit more about what you can. I know you can't necessarily get into, you know, the exact language of it, but maybe could you give some examples of what the SEC could offer you that would you know, kind of strike that balance of being accessible to clients, getting across the message you want to get across, but doesn't run aground of what they're saying in this current FAQ?
Well, in mine, you know, I guess it would be, you know, whatever the, you know, they had one line, and I'm just, I want to make sure I recite it correctly, where they say, it's not, we don't want, it's inappropriate to say that we're held to a fiduciary standard. Which, again, from a legal standpoint, there are many state registered and federally registered advisors who by law are actually held to a fiduciary standard. And wouldn't it be great to be able to say under the legal obligation section, you know, if they can't say held to a fiduciary standard, maybe we, you know, we are required to act, you know, under a fiduciary standard or in accordance with a fiduciary standard, you know, what phraseology that gets us to the fact that, you know, the legal truism that they have to operate as fiduciaries. You know, what set of words can they live with under that legal obligation section that basically says, yeah, we do operate under a fiduciary standard. You know, they don't like held to a fiduciary standard, but you know that really is the case in a lot of cases. And you know, would it be better to say act in accordance with, you know, serve as fiduciaries, you know, something along those lines that, you know, allows them to speak truthfully as to their role, but doesn't step on or run afoul of the SEC's, you know, mandate.
Well, that not going to disagree with Jeff, but I think, I mean, I'm just looking at the language here, and you know, one of the positive sides of this to me is that it's so short. It with the footnotes of 765 words, it's not like the Reg BI release, which was 770 pages, where you could put all sorts of things there. So it's so short, and I think it's in many ways quite clear in terms of their meaning. And I have a difficult time, and I've spoken to, over the last week and a half, I've spoken to several legal scholars, and about, you know, help me think through this, what this means. And I, you know, in each case that, you know, it was anecdotal, of course, you know, they were as baffled as I think Jeff and I are baffled at what they have said here. And what that means to me is that the importance of what they've said here shouldn't be minimized in terms of how clearly they are discouraging. And I'm saying, you know, I go the next step and say that, you know, when you look at the restraints there, barring they take Jeff's advice and sort of come back and say, well, you can do this, this, and this, as Jeff basically is suggesting, but barring they're doing that, you know, I don't see how one can express their fiduciary status in a way that is plausible and meaningful, frankly, given these constraints. And so either they've got to come back and sort of, as I say, take Jeff's advice and say that, well, here's all the ways you can do it, or you know, alternatively, you know, the commissioners should weigh in and you know, use their authority to say that we need to redo this because this didn't come out as it was intended. So that's that in some ways would be the cleaner way of doing that, and I think it would send the right message to the marketplace that this needs to be rethought. This language here, and this is how we're going to do that. So that's how I would look at it. Patrick, the other piece of it is, and I'll send this to you after we get off. We came out with a 2-page document, I think in December, that offered some specific language that we believe is safe and within bounds, and a way that ways that RIAs could express their fiduciary status. And I'll send that to you as soon as we get off. So, any other questions or comments? Tracy.
Tracy's written, do you think the Form CRS as written does what it was intended, differentiates professionals?
Our research from last fall suggests that it does not, that it fails pretty completely in doing so. And and I'm going back to the way that, for example, the former chair expressed what his vision of the CRS was in terms of what he hoped to accomplish by it. And I maintain that using the former chair's standard, that our research suggests that it failed to accomplish that goal. Jeff, do you have a view on that?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I don't think it gets there. I think, the main approach that the Form CRS takes in the first paragraph, it's that, there's some standardized language. The investment advisory services compensation structures differ from that of a registered broker dealer. It's important that you understand the differences. And then there's a, tells you how you can go to investor.gov /CRS to learn more. So it's really just sort of a, a quick primer in the first prescribed paragraph relative to how, yes, there is a difference, and also here's the way to go out and learn more. But that's really the width and breadth of that statement.
Right. Mark.
Knut, I just want to be clear. Looking at the FAQs, the FCC's FAQs, they say for certain items, the instructions provide the use of prescribed language. They use the example of the legal obligations section. In the next paragraph, they say for items without prescribed language, and then they go on to say, don't describe yourself as an investment advisor who is held to the fiduciary standard.
Correct.
Okay, are you, given those two bookends, are you saying that there's nowhere in Form CRS that an RIA can describe itself as a fiduciary, that you think that there's just no way they can do it anywhere in CRS?
I say the answer is yes, and I rely on the language that just follows what you noted there, Mark, regarding an investment advisor who is held to the fiduciary standard. That is as plain vanilla and straight and narrow as you can get. And when the staff suggests that that's going to likely be inappropriate, I ask, well, then is there anything that's not inappropriate, frankly? And I don't know where you go from there. If just reading that piece of it alone is fair, and they put it out there, and so yes, I say I don't know what you can put down there now, based on that.
On top of that, that in that same breath, it says the instructions don't permit firms to state their required standard of conduct using their own wording. So it, kind of puts a wet rag on, into that free flow of,
Right.
figuring out your own way to state it.
But but that by itself, I would say, and I think you said this early in our conversations, maybe last fall, Jeff, that the issue is don't put it in the section. Don't put it in the section, where the best interest prescribed language is. Put it somewhere else, and that's what we have up until 2 weeks ago. That's what we have advocated. You can put it elsewhere as long as it's not in that section. But so I thought that addressed that question that you raised, Jeff. But I think Mark raises the more fundamental point to me. That given this language, what could any reasonable person say is going to make is going to pass their approval? And I don't know what that language could be, given what they've said doesn't pass it. And so, yes, Jeff, they need to come out and do as you suggest, and give examples of language that would meet their approval. Mark, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So it is in that context that I think that a lot of people haven't commented on this, because on some level it's in a sense unbelievable. If you take the language, if you look at it as a textualist, I guess that way of looking at language is in vogue or not in vogue. But if we're supposed to interpret the language that is written in a direct way, I don't know how you get past that bar, and that this is an extraordinary piece in terms of the implications of suddenly suggesting that from a regulatory SEC point of view, that investment advisors should not be able to state their fiduciary status. So and because of that, I think we'll see other entities, other individuals, other groups be raising their hand and contributing to this conversation. And on our part, we have already reached out to some of the commissioners. We will ask for a meeting with Chairman Gensler, and I hope that we'll be able to get that meeting. And this is a sidebar, but just by chance, the day that this came out, I happened to be in Boston, and I happened to be meeting with Tamar Frankel. And Tamar is 96 years young, but she finds this outrageous, and she uses the term outrageous. And I have a short statement from her I'll send out in a press release immediately after this, where she expresses herself about what this is. And so I think the chairman, I think the other commissioners need to hear those types of expressions on this opinion. Anything else? Okay. Then it looks like that we are completed. As I said, I will send out a press release that highlights some of the views that you've heard there, and that includes Professor Frankel's. And we'll be following up, and we'll keep you apprised on what we learn as we follow up with the SEC on this critical topic. So thank you one and all for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week.
Thanks, Knut.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.